Diversity in the Management of Investment Report. Aisha, this is your item. You have
Yes.
about 15 minutes or so.
Oh, I can be faster than that.
Great.
So I think you all have in front of you the 2018 Annual Progress Report, which is our diversity and investment management. I just want everyone to know this is definitely a cooperative effort by many at CalSTRS, not just inside the investment office. We did a pretty significant revamp of the report last year, so it's in a similar format. It really reflects sort of the multi-pronged approach that we're taking to diversity. The first section focuses on our investment staff, our internal investment staff, and I want to thank TJ Kochar from HR for his help in putting together that information. The second section is in regards to our portfolio engagement. And once again, I want to thank Mary Morris, who works in corporate governance with me. She works on a lot of those efforts and was instrumental in putting that section together. The third section is where we get contributions from all the various asset classes. And so everyone that's part of the diversity team helps put together their specific asset class portion. And then last but not least, I want to thank communication staff, especially Renee Everts and Nan Bowie for their edits and their beautiful graphics to make this report all come together. So it was just posted online yesterday, so that's why I wanted to make sure you all had a copy in front of you. And I will entertain any questions.
Any questions for Aisha? Okay, thank you very much. Keep up the good work. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Aisha. Very good.
So I
Thank
think
you.
I'm
Yep, Brian Rice,
just gonna
and Travis. Is Travis? Hi, Brian. Travis. This is the Green Initiative Report. And sure, of Aisha? Yeah, sure. Aisha, Dana has a question for you or comment.
So Aisha, once we have an opportunity to go through this, and I guess maybe Chris and Harry, I don't know if we wanted to ask questions about it or have a discussion more about the things that we find in here. We just contact you and ask you to have something to put on the agenda?
Yeah, you know, actually, Dana, good point. I was just thinking that both of these reports, perhaps we can have a conversation so that both of these reports could get a little bit more visibility and airtime, because there's so much work that's going on by a lot of people that are being very effective. And I just think the last couple of years we haven't given enough airtime to these reports, and I would like for us to do so. It's not obviously not going to happen now, but I was thinking, Dana, maybe we should talk about off-site, setting aside some time on these reports themselves, where we really set aside 60 minutes or 90 minutes and really dive into what's been done to date, where we are, and where we're headed around these issues. And I think they link in some ways to some of our competitive advantages that we have because of the work that's been done to date. I think there's some transitions taking place, obviously, with Ann's retirement. So the answer to your question is yes, Dana, but I'm not sure if it's on at a traditional investment committee meeting, or we'd be better off at an offsite, putting it on the agenda.
Let's put our heads together and
Yeah.
see what we can do.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure. Brian. Travis.
So good afternoon again. We have agenda item 10. This is the presentation of the fiscal year 2016-17 CalSTRS Green Team Report. I'm joined by my colleague Travis Antoniono. He reminded me that it's been about 3 years now we started working together on sustainability issues. Travis does most of the heavy lifting, in other words, the hard work, particularly putting together this report, coordinating everybody's efforts. We do have a quick presentation to go through. I'm really sort of highlighting a few of the activities that we did last fiscal year, and then some changes that we've done to the report. Travis was charged with refreshing it. I think he's done a nice job, and he'll highlight what he's done. As usual, we should have representation of the Green Team, each asset class behind me, so if you have any specific questions around asset class efforts, they're prepared to answer them. So traditionally, the work of the Green Team has kind of been around 4 themes. One has been, continuing education around environmental issues, due diligence around existing investments in the portfolio, consideration of new environmental themed investments, and then potential asset allocation impacts. So to give you an example of continuing education, as this slide shows, we did have a number of really good speakers either come in and present to the group, as you can see up there on the left. And also there were a number of outside events that we were able to attend to, again, focus on environmental themed education. And then around ongoing due diligence, I wanted to highlight an engagement that we're doing in corporate governance around the TCFD, which is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. This is something that you're going to probably be hearing a lot about going forward. This is an effort that Michael Bloomberg led. It brought together financiers, investors, asset owners, asset managers to really come up with a concise, relevant, hopefully consistent framework through which companies and investors and asset managers can report on their climate risk strategies, risk management. And that, what you see up there, those are sort of the four bases, the four themes that it's centered around, and there's some other metrics. So what we've done is we started engagement last fiscal year, ongoing now, to try to reach out to at least 100 companies. We sort of try to see, well, maybe 20 a year, to talk to them about their awareness of the TCFD and their willingness to integrate the TCFD guidance. And we'll continue to keep you updated, most likely through the corporate governance engagement updates that we do. And so for the sake of time, we try to get maybe some credit for 3 and 4 in the same slide. And this was to point out the phasing in of the low carbon index that we've done. As you can see, the phase 1 was done in July of 2017. Phase 2 and phase 3 forthcoming. And also the part on the lower right is from MSCI, and that just points out what the carbon exposure reduction across the markets are for the low carbon index.
So let's stay on that slide for a minute. So this is the low carbon index that the committee worked with the staff and consultants on. It's 2.4 billion over, will be committed over the period of time, right?
Yes.
So this is a status report,
Yes.
okay? This is not something to just gloss over. This is a big deal. Putting like a lot of, we made a big decision, right?
Yes.
To do this. So I think it will be important on it, at least on a, maybe annually would be enough. Maybe once every 2 years. I do think the status of the implementation and the performance of that index would be helpful for us to monitor.
And the reason that there wasn't an additional detail in the Green Team report on this was because it was more acting as an announcement due to the fact that it was July 1st, which aligned with the report.
Yeah, and my comment wasn't meant to be negative or perceived as like a downer. It was more like, let's feel good about this. It's, we planned something, yeah.
Highlighted here.
Great, yeah.
Okay, so now I'll turn over to Travis, and he'll talk to you a bit about how we updated the report.
Great, thank you, Brian. Yeah, as Brian mentioned, we did do several different updates to the report. As we speak with stakeholders, a lot of common questions that are directed towards us can be found, the answers to them can actually be found in previous versions of Green Team reports. This is a little bit alarming to us because we thought that the information was already there, it was already available. And so as stakeholders have these type of questions, we felt it was very important for us to be able to bridge that gap between what we provide in the report and ultimately how our stakeholders are absorbing the information. In trying to resolve this issue and mitigate this issue, we took a little bit of an internal reflection of what we can do better to resolve this. And the findings that we found, that we actually changed, were one, to significantly reduce the amount of text that we used. Text just in itself, especially when you have 50+ pages of it, it's very difficult to navigate. And a lot of our stakeholders were going through the report trying to find just an isolated aspect of it. And when you have 50 pages of text, obviously very difficult. But at the same time, something that was very beneficial to a lot of the stakeholders that we found was the use of infographics, graphics, and tables. So we doubled down on that effort, pulled back on the text. Another change that we really concentrated on was being able to dive into the individual asset classes and how each of one of these asset classes actually integrate environmental risk factors within their investment management process. This is something that stakeholders spoke favorably of. And so as a green team met throughout the course of the year, we were able to develop these 10 icons, which represent the different methods that each one of the asset classes uses. Some of the asset classes only touch on a few of these aspects, but then some touch on many more. And during the course of the report, you're going to be able to find a profile page of each of the asset classes and the custom mix of these icons that represent the integration methods. To provide an example of just how this is actually portrayed within the report, we provided the corporate governance summary. The corporate governance summary, so the title of the asset class is going to be on the upper left-hand side, followed by the number of staff as well as the assets under management for that asset class. Now, front and center towards the top is going to be the org chart, or more importantly, a functional org chart. So it doesn't necessarily say what personnel are there, but it does say what function they hold or what function the asset class is really driving forward for the organization. And that's something that was common to us as far as having questions on. A common question was, what exactly does this asset class invest in? What exactly does this asset class do? And hopefully that's going to be able to alleviate some of those questions. Over to the left-hand side, though, are those icons that we already spoke about. Once again, this is a very custom mix, and you can see a variety of different methods that corporate governance team uses to integrate environmental risk factors within their investment management process. Now, on the right side of the slide, and this is standardized for all the different asset classes, we do highlight the performance of the asset class as a whole, and we do so in a long-term effort. And then for those asset classes that do have more of a dedicated sustainable strategy, we've also highlighted the performance of those strategies. Below that, we provide additional information for each and every asset class. In this instance, we provide information on the 2 different sustainable manager that are in the portfolio that we have, as well as an update on the ESG manager search. And that concludes the presentation, but we're happy to answer any other questions.
And just for, on INV 106, there is a page that explains what each one of these icons mean. INV 106.
Karen?
Hi. When I was looking at the asset classes, and I noticed that the figures for total staff and total AUM had certain dates, but then they were not consistent through the other ones. Was there a reason why you got June 30th on some and March 31 on others?
Yeah, as far as alternative asset classes, majority of the alternatives, such as real estate, infrastructure, or private equity, typically have March 31st. And that goes back to as far as reporting on performance. It's typically a laggard of a 3-month basis for some of those asset classes.
I would think going forward, we could get more consistency around staffing. As Travis said, that was just a legacy thing. When we got performance numbers, some of the private asset classes could only do as of a certain date, so
we can add,
correct that.
yeah, we can add on 2 as of dates, one as of being consistent throughout the entire branch, and then the AUM being similar to what we've seen today.
Because I remember in a previous meeting, Chris told us we were able to get the business plans for all the asset classes, and he told me, or told us, to save it, so I saved it. And so when I matched them up, they didn't match. And so, for instance, on private equity, you have 22 staff, and that's, but then the total AUM for March 31 was 29.4. The business plan said it was 16.6
Yes.
billion. And so that's a lot of difference.
Yeah,
So I wasn't really sure how that
And the
that
difference
happened.
between that is the total exposure is shown in the Green Team report, which includes not only the net value of the assets, but then also undelivered capital. So capital that hasn't actually been distributed to our partners as of yet.
It's committed capital.
Committed capital.
Total committed capital, the dry powder plus the actual portfolio Normally, we talk about the total portfolio, but in this case, particularly when we're doing green investing, some of it's committed and they just haven't drawn the money down yet. So they wanted to show that number in this report.
AUM is sometimes used both ways, and more precisely, we should use the term NAV, or total exposure.
Remember, I'm new at this. I'm new at this, so.
So I think we're doing okay. We got it. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Margot.
Thank you.
Karen, you okay?
That's it. I'm good.
Dana?
I just want to say, I really like the format of this. I hope it's really helpful. This will be up on our website.
It already is, as of November.
So will, I guess depending on how astute you are when you're printing, you could print out each one of these asset classes singularly.
Yes.
Or so never mind. We don't need to maintain those links as long as they can figure out how to print it out and whatever. Then they can take whatever they need with them. So I really like this. It's a really great report.
It's a PDF base, and so individuals will be able to select the customized pages that they would like to print out.
The infographics are stellar. Really good job, guys.
Communications, I'd like to highlight communications. They did a fantastic job.
The water graphic.
They took my, as well as the rest of the Green Team members' storyboards and designs and really brought it to life.
Sharon?
I was just curious, when we do reports like this, are we sharing this at places like CII and Ceres, and do we have like panels or because I know some of us are going to CII, and I'm hoping you guys are, I assume you're going, or someone's going from and you'll be promoting the report.
We are always highlighting this report. I just did a webinar this morning for the PRI, and one of my slides highlighted this report. Yeah.
Similarly, I was at PIMCO yesterday at a event and spoke about it with 4 different individuals. And I can tell you that the 4 individuals had not heard of an institutional investor highlighting down to that individual asset class level how they integrate environmental risk. So if we're not the first, we are definitely one of the first.
It's that pattern of just telling our stories and getting it out there, so I'm glad that we're doing that and look forward to hearing about it at CII.
No, and I know the newsroom for all, not just the CG, like the CG annual report, the diversity report, the Green Team report. I know the newsroom uses these reports constantly because people are very interested in what we're doing.
Lynn?
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great report again this year. And I had one specific question on page INV 90. And these are the charts showing the sentiment of asset managers, global equity managers changing. And so chart number 2 says that 66% have taken steps in the past fiscal year to better incorporate climate risk into their investment process compared to only 30% 2 years ago. I'm just curious if you could comment on why you think that there's been such a big dramatic jump. Is it something that CalSTRS is doing through an engagement process, or is it just a general awareness?
Probably a combination of both. I mean, certainly, I think we've been very diligent in engaging our external managers around ESG issues like climate change, but I think there's just more and more attention, and I think more and more managers' clients are probably doing similar things in terms of wanting them to pay more attention to environmental issues.
I would also direct your attention to the next page, which is whether or not the organization is a UNPRI signatory. As you can see, there's significant uptake in the number of organizations that are now signatories that we deal with as far as managers. Being a signatory, you have 6 different principles, and some of these principles will align more closely to incorporating climate risk as well. And so as you see the uptake in UNPRI signatories, you're probably going to see an uptake in these other aspects as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Maybe along the lines of Lynn's question, so do you sense that it's institutions like CalSTRS that are driving managers to begin to become more educated, more sensitive, more aware of these issues, or are managers initiating this on their own? It's an interesting debate.
I would say that for a long time it was public pension funds like CalSTRS that were pushing this. I would say over the last year or two, when you see State Street and BlackRock really starting to get more visible, I think that resonates with a lot of investors.
Alan, do you have a different view?
The investment management banking community is a lagging and not a leading indicator. You're a leading indicator. They never would have come up with a product if you didn't create the demand for the product. To their credit, they saw an economic demand and they're filling it. But had they been left to their own devices and you not raised the issue, they would not be waving the green flag, in my opinion.
It just speaks to the potential of the influence that we can have to create good change.
In every asset class.
Yeah.
There are now people looking at the issues that this board put as important in your investment beliefs and in your risk factors that are part of their due diligence and part of their reporting to clients that would not have occurred had you and similar institutions not taking that action.
Maybe at a future meeting, when Dana and I determine where it should go, be interested to really get a better insight into who you believe in these asset classes are really digging deep into these issues. I've heard the term greenwashing, and where people are just using the terms for the sake of ticking the boxes, but that's for another day. I see nodding of heads, like that's probably a good conversation for us to have. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Item 11, Ann and Aisha, the corporate governance policy revision, second reading.
Yep. Good afternoon. As you recall, at our last meeting, we brought forth the first reading of the corporate governance investment policy, and that really was just lifting from the global equity policy and creating our own investment policy. This one, we're actually, we've tweaked that a little bit and then added a little bit of background about the ESG sustainability managers. So let me have Aisha go through some of the specific changes, and then a couple of things I want to highlight, because I want to talk a little bit after she's finished about the co-investment, because when I was up before with Mike, I want to make sure you understand what it is, sort of the strategy we're looking at on co-investments. But let me have Aisha go through the specifics that we've done as she did again, the heavy lifting on putting this policy together. And then I've got a few things, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Thank you. So just so everyone's aware, the corporate governance policy is somewhat unique because it's now divided sort of into two parts. So the first part's related to the corporate governance program, which are all the activities that are related but don't directly pertain to investment management. So things like proxy voting and company engagement. The second half of the policy is where we put the corporate governance portfolio management policy. And that's where all the significant edits have occurred. I hope that my legend was helpful. Part of this was just because there's a lot of language, for example, from the the global equity policy that was used. So this is language that really has already been approved just in another policy for CalSTRS. The highlighted portion was specific language to corporate governance. In a lot of places, you'll just see corporate governance inserted as a word as opposed to global equity. And then obviously the green double underline is where it was part of the corporate governance policy already, it just got moved to another section. So if it's, the significant edits sort of start on INV 140. I'm happy to try to answer, answer any questions that pertain to that. I know there's a lot of different colors, but I hope, hopefully it was straightforward as much as it can be. And it's structured after the global equity policy.
Oh, I'm sorry, we have a couple people in the queue. Lynn. Oh, I'm sorry, Betty.
We're playing tricks on you.
You're trying to confuse me. You did a good job.
Okay,
You
good.
did a good job.
Thanks, Harry. I guess just really out of curiosity on IMB 141, it states that corporate governance managers are measured based on the investable universe as determined at the outset of their contract. And I guess I just had a general question as to how well these managers have performed against their benchmarks.
So one of the reasons initially the corporate governance broader benchmark, because assets were taken out of the global equity space, we were measured against a broader benchmark there. There are some tweaks that we want to do to our current benchmarks because while the broader benchmark that corporate governance is measured again, we can't find enough managers to match up to a broader benchmark. So for example, right now in our international portfolio of activists, we have one emerging markets manager. While we measure them against an appropriate EM benchmark, the corporate governance team is measured against an ACWI ex-US benchmark. That's not a really good matchup. But to answer your question about performance, it has been a tough year for our activist managers. Value's been out of favor. Most of the managers, when you've been in an 8-year bull market, they have trouble finding opportunities. And when valuations are really high, it's difficult to just find entry points.
Let me add to that. One of the things that we're doing with the corporate governance managers is we're repositioning that portfolio. And I think, as you've seen with our most recent press announcement, we've made the decisions on the ESG pool. We've chosen about 8 managers to put in the ESG pool, so we'll be funding those managers. But we're also repositioning the corporate governance managers to pull down some of those and maybe look at, it's very difficult with large cap to make a difference. Small and mid cap are easier for some of the activist managers because you can really make a difference. So over the next couple of years, you'll be seeing that they'll be doing some repositioning of the allocations within the governance managers. And so we'll have both the ESG managers and the governance managers in repositioning. Because one thing we've learned, and we'll talk about this at the March offsite, corporate governance was a special mandate way back when for, I guess Dana was on the board and Harry was just coming on when we funded Ralph Whitworth at Relational. And beginning to learn about that, what we've learned over the 10 years is it's tough in the large cap space. It's really tough in a bull market, as Aisha said, very difficult. Because what these managers look for is, undervalued companies that they can go make a difference. And on the large cap space, that can be difficult, but the small and mid cap. So Betty, you'll see over the next couple of years with this group, a little bit of repositioning of those. But it's been tough.
Yeah. And they've made money for us, but trying to keep ahead of a broad benchmark that, like Chris was showing, was up 20% last year, it's hard. Especially when you're investing in companies that have problems. I mean, they're in there to try to fix things.
I do think that the point you raised, Betty, is one that we should continue to, as a committee, monitor and look at, evaluate relative to how large of a slice of the overall equity bucket should be allocated. Should it be larger? Should it be smaller? Should it stay the same? I think over the next couple of years we'll be doing that. I think it's a large enough slice for us to monitor its performance and fees that are associated with it. And I think that space is changing quite a bit. And I do recall meeting Ralph and Relational and
Yeah, they were one of the early managers.
Yeah, he was an impressive guy. Alan?
Just a couple of quick things on performance. The universe of large cap active managers that has beaten the broad market, your staff and your managers have nothing to apologize because the whole group hasn't done well. And that's nothing new. That's been the case for a decade. So I just think that's important as a point of reference. But what doesn't get talked about is the fact that the behavior in boardrooms across the world is changed because of this group of managers asking questions, willing to take positions, that you get a cultural change in corporate boards as part of your corporate governance policy. It's impossible to measure, at least given our tools, maybe someone else has better tools, but there is a change in the way the world is working in boardrooms when they know some of these managers will take a position, do the homework, raise really legitimate business issues, and fight for that in a public environment, being supported like organizations like CalSTRS. That's important.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Alan, thank you for that. That deserves an exclamation point from my perspective. Thanks for adding that insight. Dana.
So I just have a couple questions. I think my first one is on IMV 141. Well, actually, maybe I better go back to the beginning. Let's go back to 140. I just want to make sure that I understand what we're talking about. So when we were talking earlier, Ann, we talked about the corporate governance program being across all asset classes. And that's just the program part of it, the engagement and the proxy voting and whatever.
Talking about the ESG policy.
We work with the ESG, but okay.
That's the ESG, this is the corporate governance program specifically.
Right. So the program part, well, let me ask this then, and then I'll come back to that maybe. Does the corporate governance program have engagements outside of global equities?
Well, yeah, well, because we're involved with, the 21 Risk Factor
So it does go
Committee,
across
the
all
Green
asset base.
Team.
So the program, so then, for me, I guess what I would say then, the program goes across all asset classes, because we've separated it. So we have the program and then we have the portfolio, correct? Everything that's in the two portfolios we have that's commonly known as corporate governance portfolio, that all is under global equities, correct?
Correct. Those
Okay.
are global equity investments. We either have the corporate governance managers with their GPLP, or we have the managed accounts, which are the sustainability managers.
And that's all under global equities. Okay. And
That's
then,
all global equity.
I guess I don't understand, I thought I'd found somewhere else in the document where corporate governance assets was actually capitalized, but now I can't find it. So it's all lowercase, but the corporate governance portfolio is all uppercase. So I know when we're talking, the portfolio is the portfolio. It's a proper noun, that's why it's capitalized. But I would feel that, I guess I feel the same way about the assets, or are we talking about something that's much broader and that's why it's not?
No, I think specifically for this, and Dana, you're kind of touching on, Chris talked about it in his CIO report, sort of this formatting, making some consistency across all of the policies. And there's even been discussions about certain policies we have. Do they belong in an asset class, or are they do they lay above?
Right.
And for the sake of what we're trying to do here, not to complicate things, we sort of kept these two
How they were?
how they are.
Okay.
That's not to say, and I don't want to make any commitments because that whole team's still working on a lot of that, but
Right.
you're kind of touching on some of that, but we're also trying to make some consistency in terms of what's capitalized, what's all caps, what's bolded, what's numbered, what's not,
Right.
what's in what section.
And I think this, following on what Aisha said, the project that Rapid Results team is doing, I think if this gets adopted, this will be one of the first that gets then subjected to the new model as to,
Formatting and
for the
all that kind of stuff.
consistency across the
Alrighty.
policies, across all the asset classes.
So then, Chris, I guess my last one, and Aisha, that was a very good segue to my last question. Within the executive summary, we talk about that the assets are to be invested, administered, managed prudent manner, sole benefit of participants, beneficiaries in accordance with California Constitution, TRL, other applicable statutes. it seems that if we put that in every single asset class policy document, that's a lot of redundancy, and I don't know if we want it there just because somebody might just pull that out separately. So if we had it in the executive summary that talked about all our asset classes, maybe that's not the best way to have it. So I just would, I put that back on you as you guys start to do that reformatting and reorganizing and making sure that all gets in the same way, that's something that you consider.
Yeah, there's a lot of things we're looking at to say, does it belong in the IPMP?
Right.
Or does it belong in each asset class? And so that's just another topic for
Perfect
discussion.
example of
Yeah,
paragraph.
and we have people that pull out just particular asset classes. So maybe there's a reason to have it again, so people really get that that's how we operate. So just something for you to consider when you take a look at that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I wanted to, on the co-investments, so part of our program now is we have co-investments with our corporate governance managers, which have done well, and it's an opportunity for us to get returns without paying management fees, similar to the private equity. On occasion, or actually it's becoming more frequent, we've been approached by other activist managers that are not our managers, but would like us maybe to do a co-investment or to, make an additional investment and team up with them on some engagements. It's been, like Engaged Capital has come to us. We've had numerous other ones because of our reputation. So following on what you heard this morning from your morning panel in terms of the engagement style, our reputation of being active in the governance area, our staff is going to come back and look at, could we develop some co-investment policy around doing some co-investments with either other managers, or we could source them ourselves and then go out and build some other partners along that line. Right now, the only co-investments that we can do are with our managers. Now, staff has been very good about identifying companies because of the work we've done with our corporate governance managers and what we've had to do. And Phil LaRue from the staff has been great about identifying companies. Then what we'll do is we'll go to our managers and say, let's do this one together. So that has worked well, and we still continue to do that. But the idea is, are there others that either, their managers don't have the capacity or they're on other things? So could we put the good work of the staff to begin to identify some of our own engagements and either work with some other outside managers? So that's in the very early stages of policy development. We've got to figure out how it works through making sure we either source other external managers we'd want to work with or who we would go partner with, but that's why the presentation that Mike and Margot and Paul did, corporate governance will also be part of that.
You'll keep us updated, link back to the previous items about co-investments. Obviously, I think that would need some additional oversight, et cetera, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Anything else that you want to say about co-investments? Because I actually had a little bit into the weeds questions from the co-investments, INV 142, the 100 million number. Was that just, how did you come up with that number? Why that number? You see what it is, INV 142?
Yeah.
And then just some insight into the last paragraph in that section, will be guided by external corporate governance investment advisors.
Well, the 100 million has been there for.
Yeah, it was originally 75, and then it went up to 100. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, and that's up to 100.
Yeah.
We haven't done, usually we do a lot less than that, but it gives us the ability and just the sizing. And then the external is we get the opinions of PCA.
Got it.
As we go through, we do the investment thesis, we talk to the manager, and then they sign off as an independent.
So nothing profound about the 100, it's just.
No.
Right, okay.
It's an arbitrary number with a lot of zeros.
It gets one's attention.
Well, and as we've done more co-investments, there's usually more opportunity for the co-investments, a lot of times in the larger cap space, because there's just more capacity and they're more liquid. And you can't do much with just.
Right. But we have done some with our small cap managers that have done really well, that can be, 10 or 20 or something.
Okay, so we'll learn more as we go on. about how that co-investment may or may not be expanded. You'll keep us updated. Anything else on this item? Policies before us, it's informational, but if there's no opposition to it, we could adopt it right now. Entertain, someone want to move for adoption? Thank you, Joy. Joy has moved approval. It's been seconded by Nora. Any further discussion? Seeing no additional discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, policies have been adopted. Thank you. So we will go to,
Yeah, I'm going to
yes,
a couple of things. At the last meeting, and we had discussed about me taking the opportunity at each of the meetings to give you a little bit of update of some of our corporate governance engagements.
sure.
So we thought that I'd spend a couple of minutes right now talking. I think each of you got a copy of this sheet. We sent this in January with the help of Sarah and Geraldine, and then my staff putting together some of the engagements and some of the activities. So I thought I'd use that as the basis for the update. And then I know there is an interest from the board of getting regular updates. So we'll kind of figure out, is this a good way to do it? Do you want something else in writing? But I think it'll be sort of an evolving process as to how to keep you all informed of all the activities, because there are quite a few, as I think you're well aware. So in terms of methane gas emission, I think you've heard from in the past, despite, Jane and others saying that it doesn't have as much of an impact. Actually, for many companies, it actually does have an impact. And we continued our engagement on methane gas, filing shareholder proposals. We who have withdrawn the proposal at one of the companies. We're also working with the PRI group on methane engagement with 35 other investors, and we're working, targeting 30 companies on this. And this is really to increase their disclosure around methane emissions and also what they're doing on leak detection of the methane gas in their production facilities. We're the lead on a couple of proposals on this, and this PRI effort is a 2-year effort. Brian and Travis mentioned in their report the work that we're doing on around the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, the so-called Bloomberg Task Force that we're doing. We have a goal of reaching 100 companies over the next few years. We've already sent letters to 20 and engaged with 15 already in terms of that. I think most of you know CalSTRS is very active at SASB. But Jack is on the board and Chris chairs the Investor Advisory Committee, the Investor Advisory Group there. So we are very active, and we are one of the leads in terms of working with a number of early adopters of the SASB standards. So we have a number of calls set up over the next few weeks of trying to get companies who already do very good, maybe reporting to the GRI or the Global Compact, and talking to them about also adding the SASB methodology and the reporting and how they see that. I think many of you are aware of the Climate Action 100 that was announced recently, and we are taking the lead on a number of companies on those engagements under the Climate Action 100, which is a global effort of investors targeting the largest emitters. And then finally, as I think we mentioned, we have finally selected the ESG managers that have gone into the pool, and Brian and Travis have done the traveling, the due diligence, and we've finally come up with the 8 that we think will be the best, and we'll begin to have discussions about which ones we want to fund initially. But that's been really very exciting, and I think, as Alan said, CalSTRS was an early mover on many of these, and the products, it's amazing how many responses that we got to that RFP or the ASP that we did. Diversity, and I know we'll talk a little bit about this also at the next, but we continue to push on the diversity on corporate boards and also the diversity in human capital. In this proxy season, we'll be engaging with our friends at the University of California with 89 California companies. I think I've talked to you before about the California companies we're sort of focusing on who have no women on the board. UC is going to be teaming up with this year. We're sending about 90 letters to companies here in California and engaging with them. A lot of them are smaller companies, but talking to them about the importance of diversity on their board. We're also an active part of the 30% coalition, and their target is the Russell 1000 companies, so a little bigger. And we'll be engaging 131 companies there in terms of letters who have either only one woman on the board or 0 women on the board. And then also, as you know, this past year, we changed our proxy voting guidelines that we will vote against companies that have no women on the board if after we have engaged them for at least a year and nothing has been done. So as of right now, we will probably vote against the Nominating and Governance Committee of about 28 companies as a result of in the Russell 1000, and somewhere between 20 and 30 California companies. What we do is we identify them at the beginning of the year, and then as we get closer to their annual meeting, see if they have actually added anyone. But we will definitely be voting against a number of Nominating and Governance Committee members at the companies who have not moved on diversity. In terms of, we talked a little bit about the Dakota Pipeline and the indigenous peoples. We are also engaging banks on the Equator Principles and those who are signatories to the Equator Principles, which is supposed to protect the indigenous people's rights. And the issue there is, how are they enforcing them? How are they making sure that they are financing projects, and that if they're signatories to the Equator Principles, how those principles are incorporated to the oversight of the project. This became an issue with the Dakota Pipeline because you had a number of banks that were financing the pipeline, but weren't, it was arguable whether they were actually following the principles. So we want to see what their internal controls are. If they are signatories, how do they carry them out in the financing of those projects? So we're working on that. I think some of you know that we have signed on to the Investors for Opioid Accountability. A lot of interest in the concerns about the drug companies who are producing opioids, as well as the distribution companies. And that is a group of 41 investors with about 1.5 trillion assets under management. The UAW Retiree Medical Trust is the leader, along with Mercy Investment Services. They have identified 6 manufacturers that we're engaging, 3 distributors, and then other 4 treatment manufacturers. And we're looking for governance reforms there. What we're looking for as we engage with the companies is an independent chair, an independent investigation and report if in fact they had some regulatory fines or legal issues or settlements that they had to do, what happened. I think you all know, we've talked before about McKesson, who was dinged by the regulators in terms of how many pills they were sending into certain geographic areas in the country, and where were their internal controls around the distribution of those, and what kind of oversight mechanism that they have put into place. So we're engaging the companies on those. We're also, in terms of clawing back executive compensation if it was earned related to the distribution of those drugs or the over-distribution.
Can I just add? I just wanted to add one point on that, because I think that's one of the stronger governance reforms we can get at some of these companies, because a lot of them have clawbacks already in place, but it's generally for some type of illegal activity or a material misstatement. This is really for any type of misconduct. And so it gives the board power in order to claw back these things for what some would consider sort of code of ethics violations or things like that.
So a clawback, sorry, because we use terminology in corporate governance.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I realized it's like, I bet some of the folks. So it is the ability to claw back some of the pay that they had received related to activities that was misconduct. And as Aisha said, right now, many of the executive compensation programs will claw back compensation if it was like a financial restatement. So you really didn't earn the money, and so you should not have, you shouldn't keep the money. This is clawing back for misconduct. If you earned compensation related to misconduct, and you really, again, should not have earned it. So that is a very powerful tool so that individuals are not incented to engage in misconduct so that they can sort of ramp up their pay. Some of the other, we're trying to talk to the companies about identifying, either creating a risk committee or identifying where in the board risk oversight is for these types of internal controls that we talked about for these companies. The other thing that we have talked to them about, and Aisha can touch on this, is many of these companies exclude these legal settlement costs from the metrics and when they calculate compensation, which is, they should exclude those because it isn't cost that should go into the earnings to base the compensation on. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the work you've done around that.
So this is like, and it sort of covers everything from, legal costs to regulatory fines. A lot of companies like to sort of back those or add them back into the earnings metrics. And we want to make sure that that's not the case. And we hope that the companies are setting a tone that the executives are responsible for these things when they happen and that they should be held accountable in terms of their compensation.
Yeah. So that is one that we have had success at some, and there are some shareholder proposals on that. And then the other thing we're doing with the companies is encouraging them to get input from stakeholders around the misconduct and the oversight of these drug companies. So it's been a successful engagement so far. It's still going on, and so we'll be able to report more as we go through the proxy season.
For the most part, most of the companies have been very responsive and have been willing to have these calls. Obviously, it will wait and see what actions they take, but I think it's a very good start that they're willing to have a call with this group.
We have spent a great deal of time with Wells Fargo Corporation. I think I was named to the Stakeholder Advisory Board there, which was created last year after some of their issues. We're working with them on their board refreshment. We voted against a number of their board members last year, and I know the Treasurer's Office also has been engaging with them in terms of the reforms that they're making. K-12, I know Aisha and Geraldine are writing to the K-12, the CAVA schools, to meet with them again in March when we're in Washington, D.C. Private prisons, Philip is working to meet with one of the private prison companies this fall, and then to tour also one of their facilities and continue the engagements with them. So those are really, and then I think, as you know, Apple will be meeting with some of the members of the senior management at Apple and the board in terms of what steps they're taking on in response to the letter that we sent a few weeks ago.
So that's a lot, and I'm certainly very interested in hearing how Apple responds. But I'm going to speak for myself and not for the committee. I think Apple, overall, is an exemplary corporate citizen. The fact that they're bringing all this capital back into America, a lot of the issues that they've led, I think they've done an exemplary job on. Having said that, I do think the whole issue of new information about the effects, potential dopamine effects of, and how we play in all of that, and something good and positive can come out of it, I think would be terrific, and they're certainly well positioned to be effective in creating some change. It's kind of, you start to become aware of, and I don't know enough about it, but I think it's an interesting topic that's being researched. And if it has effects on young children's brain and their ability, and I see it firsthand, it'd be interesting to see how that evolves in terms of safety and regulations. It's not really about parental controls, that they're already there, I think, right? But anyway, I don't want to, this isn't the right time. I wanted to make a point that in many ways, Apple has been an exemplary corporate citizen from my view.
We agree.
Yeah. So, but we're all in needs of improving and getting better, and I think they probably embrace that as well.
Yes.
Okay, Dana?
So ironically, Harry, I've received a letter today from the United Kingdom, from a company that represents, for the United Kingdom, the Confederation of Football Day. I'd slaughter it. It's Brazilian football in England. And it references our open letter with Janet to Apple, so I'll make sure you get a copy of this. But that was a really strange entity to receive communication about the Apple stuff. It was, so I'll make sure that you get a copy
It
of that.
reinforces the point we made earlier. And global has given us a global footprint.
Exactly. And, yeah, it's
So
very, very interesting. So, going back to the engagement report, Ann, you gave us orally a tremendous amount of information. And I don't think that, I think that this is an example of something that's succinct and tight that can be used by our stakeholders, our constituencies, by us. But I think that if we could, I don't necessarily want to create more work for you, but maybe it wouldn't be more work if every time the board meets or once a month, that we pull maybe 3 or 4 of these out and go in depth into the same types of things that you were talking about. I think a good example is that is on the back where we talk about the pipeline monitoring. You actually went into every meeting that we had, who we talked to, and some of these don't have that. And I know that for our constituency groups that engage a lot of our members on a more regular basis than we get to engage our members on these issues, the more information we can give them, the easier it is for them to have those conversations. So if we could take a look and consider that. I don't think we need to go into all these in depth, and I think there's a good reason just to have that higher level. So I really do like this, but maybe pull 3 or 4 out of these every month or so. Give us a lot more information or update it or however. And I think that it'll become a very good tool for everybody.
We'd be happy to do that. And that's why I say we want to improve what's the best way for you to get the information. My team has worked with Sarah and Geraldine from the stakeholder group to say, okay, what are the issues of concerns to the stakeholders? And then we could work with them to say, okay, what would be the 3 or 4 issues, that month or that quarter that are the ones that we want to do a deeper dive into. So we are happy to coordinate with them, and then we can check to see, okay, these are the ones, are you hearing, and there are other issues, we can check with you, is there another topic that you think that we should highlight? But we'd be happy to, because we want to improve the process so that you get the information, the stakeholders get it.
Absolutely.
And we can keep you informed in a timely manner.
And I think asking the constituency groups in particular, which ones they need more information on is a really good idea, but let's not wait for their ask.
Right.
Because Lord knows, something's gonna come out of left field that they haven't asked about, and they're gonna get on, and so let's kind of help them out and pick some of these ourselves.
Yep,
All right,
happy to do
thank you.
that.
Get that again? It's a,
Yeah.
can we get that?
Do you like that, the model, though? Do you like that document, the way?
Yes, it's really nice.
Okay.
It's a nice one-pager.
Can we get Sharon's in the queue, do you want to?
Yeah, I would just reiterate what Dana said, and I agree. What's interesting to me, I'd say in the last year, is instead of getting requests for me or Jack or someone to talk about, is my pension safe? I want to hear how CalSTRS is dealing with, the pipelines or fossil fuels and then the Apple thing, I've had a lot of questions about that. So I'd agree maybe of focusing on like 3 things every month or whatever's feasible on the communication side. And then if we could, I assume the things we post on the website are downloadable as PDFs usually, or so that stakeholder groups can download that, share that with their members. And if there's any links, I know that's kind of, I guess, electronically people can share it. If there's links to more information, more in-depth, detailed information that we could sort of put in that. I do think it's interesting how the questions are changing, I think, from our constituency groups. And so the more we can be proactive. But this is great, so thank you.
Good. Yeah, because we can do links to letters that are public or our annual report or, any of the things that it's easy to embed those links on the website. Mm-hmm.
Jennifer? And then after Jennifer's comments, we're going to move to the next item, and I'm mindful of the time. We do have a couple of items in closed session that will need our full attention. So after Jennifer's comments, we'll move on to the next item, which is an issue the treasurer has brought before us. So Jennifer, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Jennifer Baker, California Teachers Association. I wanted to express our appreciation for the tremendous work and the amount of work that is often requested by not only our organization, but other organizations. And we appreciate the comments of the board members as far as trying to find new ways to communicate all the work that you're doing, because what happens in the field and in the legislature is if they don't know that you're doing it, the perception becomes that you're doing nothing. And so we've been working very diligently to try to educate our members. The level of involvement that you get in some of your conversations and how complex it is. And it's a real challenge, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And there is also a perception that all you need to do is just divest. If you oppose a certain issue, just divest, and somehow magically all the problems will go away. It's much harder to educate. So the more that you're able to do, the easier, hopefully, it will be not only for us to educate our members, but we also use those same tools to educate legislators and their staff, who often have many of the same perceptions or unfortunately sometimes misperceptions. So we want to thank you for what you're doing and ask you to continue to do more so that we can help you so that you can focus on making money for our members. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, thank you, everyone. And we're going to move to the next item, which is item 12. So I wanted to bring to the committee's attention, obviously, Ian and Aisha and Mary Hartman? Mary Hartman. Yeah, exactly. Their report.
Back in the back. Okay. I know you out there laughing.
Yeah, Mary, yeah, exactly. No, I think Chris's closed session is Bonanza slide.
she's there.
But the report obviously speaks to all of the work that has been going on around diversity and women on corporate boards, and they'll speak to that. But what triggered this this item was Treasurer Chung wrote to me and to the committee, really asking us to go further, and speaks about some specific goals that he suggests we reach, and then recommendations for voting proxies should companies not be responsive. This is informational today for discussion purposes, so we're not looking necessarily to take action. I'm going to get to Steve in a moment to make some comments on behalf of Treasurer. But also in the on this item, you see a communication to Elizabeth Murphy, the Secretary of the SEC, which is an example of collaboration and partnership, and you can see the organizations that have signed off on this communication, which is relevant to the topic being discussed. And then December 4th, Ann Sheehan wrote on behalf of for CalSTRS directly to the chair, Honorable Jay Clayton, the chair of the SEC, around women on boards and sexual harassment issues, et cetera. So there are actions that have taken place, and clearly we're at a different period. Some issues have surfaced, obviously, in the public light around corporate boards, corporate behavior, et cetera. But the Treasurer's Office, Steve, let me turn it over to you if you want to make a few comments at the start here.
But thank you for that, Harry.
You're welcome.
Let me just say on behalf of Treasurer Chung that there is no doubt, I think, in his mind or in the mind of anyone in the Treasurer's Office, that without the good work that Ann and her staff have done, they have basically been the hallmark by which others have followed in trying to change the landscape of corporate governance in this country. And for that, you guys should be applauded. You've just done a remarkable, and I've monitored it over time, and it's just been remarkable. I think what is at issue here and was at the heart of the Treasurer's letter is the pace at which change is occurring within those boardrooms. I think it's his feeling that it's occurring too slow, and that we need to sort of ratchet this up and establish a marker that we know that we've established for ourselves in working with others, and that will let others know that that's what we expect of them. And I think, I'll just say for my part, the details can be worked out, but I think this concept of the 30-30 effort and using those as our goals and letting other people know that we're going to hold them accountable for those goals, I think is really at the heart of what we're trying to advance here. So it's the pace of what we're talking about, what the triggers would be, and then what our response should be if, in fact, we don't see significant progress. And I think the Treasurer, if he were here, would argue that we haven't seen as much progress as we would have hoped for. both in terms of women on boards, but also in terms of underrepresented minorities, people with various sexual orientations. Again, we tend to rely, our corporate boardrooms have tended to rely much on the same old composition. And so for that, I think he would like to see us engage in a serious discussion as to whether this idea of establishing goals of 30 and 30 for those populations would be something that we would want to embrace and put it into our corporate governance policy. And I would, again, I mentioned this to Ann, I think he would be open if their details are such that we give some flexibility to staff. I think that would be fine, but I think setting a higher goal in his mind is something that would send the appropriate message throughout the corporate landscape. So with that, I'll just stop there. And Ann and I did talk about the second item that was in the letter, and she's assured me that we work closely with New York City pension funds and their policies. And so I would just say, as long as we're doing what we need to do there to ensure that we're getting detailed information as much as we can under the scope of law, that we're doing that, and Ann assures me that we are. So on that one, I'm less concerned about. But clearly, in representing the treasurer, the idea of the 30-30 is something that he wants me to pursue with this board. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Steve. Betty, do you want to speak now, or do you want to wait till Ann? You have the floor. You're next.
Why don't I wait?
Okay, great. As I turn it over to staff, I think Larry Fink recently came out again with another comment, specifically around women on boards and the need for more women on boards. He's been very outspoken. He's been visible in a lot of his comments around a lot of these issues that we've been addressing very publicly lately. So good for Larry Fink and BlackRock too. So.
And I think he has been recently, and I think this is one of the issues like Alan had talked about before. Many of the pension funds have pushed it, and it's now become sort of a mainstream issue. I think as some of you who've been on the board for a while recall, when we first started on the diversity issue, building the diverse director data source, really pushing the effort, we were kind of voices in the wilderness. It now has become mainstream. When BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street put this at the forefront of their corporate governance activities, I think that you've arrived. Now, Steve, we would agree 100% with you and the treasurer that the pace of change is much slower than any of us would desire. And one of the reasons that we will be voting no against so many directors this year is because that, we have decided, is probably the best tool to say we're going to hold you directly accountable if we do not see change. Many of them through the reason we have the multi-pronged approach is we address this from a supply as well as demand. It's like we're demanding the change, and here we have the diverse director data source. If you need help finding individuals, we can help you with that. As they say, we can't find anybody. It's like, well, we can help on that front. So in terms of the voting this year, we will come, I think the idea would be to come back and explain how many votes we did against it, how many companies, how many who have 0 women or members of, diverse individuals on the board, or 1, because I think the goal is to go to 2, to go to 3. That's why the 30% coalition, which we were founding members of, is the goal of 30%. So I think the idea would be to come back with the voting records after this year, what progress has been made, if we've moved the needle, and then to see if we need to ratchet up to even go to the board, vote against a whole board next year, and see where the numbers are, would be my suggestion. Because we have this is the first year we'll be implementing the policy, so I want to make sure that you all know, okay, what has been the result of that, and we write to the companies and saying that, you haven't made any change, we're going to vote against you, and we'll vote against the whole board next year if you don't do additional change. I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I think that by putting the companies on notice, especially if we've engaged with them, these things don't happen overnight. And so going from having 0 women on your board to having 30, that's quite a bit of a change. And I 100% agree that things are moving way too slow. But I think that it's important to understand with our new policy how that's going to affect our voting for 2018. And I think it'd be important for the board to understand, get that information.
We're going to have a lot more no votes on directors this year as a result of the policy you adopted this past year for us.
For the committee, just for reference, Treasurer Chung's on INV 169, there are 3 paragraphs in the center of the page, INV 169, are the 3 asks or directions that the treasurer is asking us to move in, which is the 30% representation on corporate boards, diversity, further diversity around GLBT, et cetera, and also then voting no against the entire boards where we're not seeing that progress, and then incorporating these principles. So that's what the treasurer's ask is relative to actions that we can take. And what I hear staff talking about is exactly what I heard in terms of moving, not doing this right away, but providing us with the voting as to how we have voted this year relative to the speed of change that, go ahead, Aisha, yeah.
Remember, so when we brought the principles to you,
In the fall.
in the fall.
Yep.
We changed our policy.
We changed the policy so that we will vote against nominating committee members and in some instances, the entire board, if they have not made any progress towards diversity. And we want to be able to measure that
Great.
and give that data to you.
This is the first proxy season that will be implementing that voting policy, is I think the point. So you just adopted it in the fall, so now we're going forward and we'll come back at the end of proxy season, staff will in June, and say, okay, we voted against, how many companies where we executed this, where we voted against the nominating committee, where we voted against the entire board, because we've engaged with them for a couple of years and they've done nothing. And then sort of reassess, okay, do we need to ratchet up the policy more? Because every year in the fall, the staff comes with changes to the corporate governance proxy voting policy, so that it'll give you the opportunity to assess, how did it work this proxy season? Do we need to up it next year?
So let me get to committee members. Betty, and then Paul, Steve, and then Dana. So Betty.
Great, thank you. I just want to take an opportunity here to really applaud Anne and her team for taking leadership on this. I mean, CalSTRS has really put this issue on the map for other investors, and we've made a lot of great headway. The pace does seem glacial every time we look back, but the fact is we've made tremendous progress. And I think, Anne, you've just been a leader in this and recognized, globally for that. I agree. I think we've been responsive with respect to the revisions to the principles, and so putting those in action for this coming proxy season makes sense. But I also want to give credit to the proxy advisory firms that are also kind of stepping up on this as well, really recognizing and monitoring board diversity. And I think going into the future, we'll also be recommending voting against the nominating committee chairs. And so we're kind of really armed, I think, going into this, into the future. So do want to take a look at that. I'm always a little nervous when we have numbers like 30 by 30, because it suggests to me that we might be sacrificing quality for quantity. And I want to be sure that, we're really placing the emphasis in the right places relative to what we want these boards to look like and their effectiveness.
Thank you for that, Betty. It's an important point. Paul.
Thank you. So do we have a definition of diversity? This is the treasurer is suggesting 30 and 30 become a definition. Do we have a definition now?
We do, I don't have the corporate government, we do have a definition that includes gender, race, ethnicity. I think we have sexual orientation in there.
But it's not there's no numbers attached.
We do not
to it?
have 30,
Numerical.
we don't have numbers around
So we
those.
just-
That is correct. But the definition of diversity is exactly the same as what.
Got it, okay. Do we have any idea? I mean, how many of the companies that we might engage with
The gender
meet the 30
diversity,
by 30
yeah, the
standard?
gender diversity is the easiest, obviously, to ascertain.
Yeah.
Not many meet the
I think it's about
30%.
in the Russell
Yeah.
one. I want to say it's been floating around 19-20% of women on corporate boards are women.
Okay.
19-20%,
Yeah.
somewhere around there.
I'm taking the under. I think
Yeah.
In the
numbers
US.
are- I think it's lower. We have the numbers because it's in one of
Well,
your reports.
And it's
12,
broken out by, small cap obviously have a lot fewer and large cap have a lot.
Okay, so what I can tell you for CalSTRS in our holdings in the Russell 3000, there are 2,364 companies that have less than 30% women on the board. So that would, so the, yeah, that's a lot that have less than 30% women on the boards. In Japan, it would be a large share of them who, so if you did it both our US holdings as well as our international holdings, we'd be voting against a lot of directors on the 30%. But those are the numbers in terms of just the raw numbers for the Russell 3000, to give you an example. Now, the 78% she calculated. Now, the ethnic racial diversity is more difficult because many companies, unless the individuals self-identify as to what ethnicity they are, that's what they put in the proxy. The sexual orientation is very difficult because unless someone wants to self-identify, it's very awkward for us to ask. There are some companies who are open about having, they identify sexual orientation as a characteristic, but it's an awkward one for us to address when we engage with a company if someone doesn't want to identify themselves that way. So the women, the gender is the easiest. Sometimes, if you've got pictures in the proxies, or you can tell if someone's African American or different ethnicity, you can identify that. But when we've talked to companies about that, it can be very difficult as to how the individual wants to identify themselves. And they don't want a top-down telling them, okay, we're going to put you in the proxy as XYZ. They want to leave it up to the individual director to be able to self-identify what their ethnicity is. So that has been a more difficult issue, but when we write to companies about diversity, we always include ethnic and gender and the sexual orientation to make sure you have the broadest pool of directors that you're recruiting to your board.
Well, aside from that, challenge in terms of identifying sexual orientation of board members, I think there's a difference between having a definition of what is diversity and a rule that says if you don't meet that definition, then we vote no. Because a definition of 30%, meaning let's just take women on the board, being 30% women, might make a lot of sense as a definition. But if there's nobody on the board now who's a woman, that's asking for a whole lot of change to the point where the company might just say, well, I can't satisfy CalSTRS, I'm not even going to try. Whereas if they added, one or two members of the board, new members who were women, and now they're at 10% and they're making some progress. So I think it would make sense to distinguish between what our rules are for voting no and what our goals are in terms of how we define a diverse board. Just a thought.
Yeah, and no, I think it's a good point. We sort of aspirational goals of what we would like to do, more diversity, gender, ethnicity, and sexual orientation, and then measuring against the progress that is being made, because if they're at 0, as you say, if they had 2 and 10-member board, it's 20%, they've made pretty good progress in a year. And that's why it is, I think staff would be reluctant to have a sort of a blunt rule that will vote against. Somebody may make good progress, but you automatically vote against because you don't hit that benchmark that year.
And I think our goal is to have engagements with those companies where if they've been underperformers in terms of diversity, and I mean by those companies where we've seen repeated openings on the board, and yet they still are replacing those board members with white males. And so they've had an opportunity, and yet we're not seeing any action.
Then we'd vote against the whole board
Yes.
in that regard, because we've given them plenty of opportunity. That's why the policy that was adopted gives us the flexibility to vote against either the nominating governance committee or the entire board, depending on the individual circumstances of our engagement with that company.
And Mary wanted to say something.
Oh, I just wanted to add one thing. I think we really need to look at the whole process overall, because we are looking at the board refreshment process as well. So not just about how are they, the numbers, right? It really is about the evaluation of the board, the long-term refreshment of the board, and how they tie it to a long-term strategy that's going to help with our performance in the companies, right? So I think that's the really big piece that we're looking
And
at.
that's part of the New York City effort, the broader effort, and why we have constantly supported New York City and what we do in our engagements with companies. You look at the whole makeup of the board. What's the strategy of the company? What are the skill sets you need? Where's your diversity? So it gives you the whole big picture of the composition of that board and how it works to the benefit of shareholders, hopefully.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I do have to say, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't, again, state that without some clarity about what our goals are, and without some clarity about what we consider significant progress, I don't know if just because somebody adds one woman to the board that we say, oh, we'll give you a pass because now you have one woman on the board, you went from 0 to 1. And I know you're shaking your head saying that's not the way it's going to be, but I don't know. I don't know what the staff is thinking in terms of saying this company has made significant progress and this one hasn't. And to me, establishing, and if you want to call it an aspirational goal, that's fine, of 30 and 30 and saying, and then we can play around with what the rules are in terms of how we react. But I'm just saying to leave it to say we really don't have any aspirational goals, which it doesn't sound like we do, at least not in terms of what Paul asked in terms of numerical values. And then to say that we'll judge on a case-by-case basis whether they've made progress. I just don't know what that is. And so I would turn to staff and say, I would feel much more comfortable if you told me, we will know for each of these companies, here's where they're at. They've only added 2 people. They should have done, from our perspective, in order to make sufficient progress, they should have added 4. Then, I'll feel more comfortable. But I think we're accepting a little bit of this vagueness here, and that's what has seemingly allowed us to be comfortable with the numbers as they are. And I could tell you the treasurer does not feel that way. He's not willing to sit by and just say,
Yeah, no.
well, let's wait another year and see what progress they've made.
Just process-wise, Steve, because I support the aspirational approach. I certainly support it. And I'm also keenly aware of the fact that I'm a white male talking about this issue. I'm keenly aware of it. I was born in the greatest country in the face of the earth, but I was given a head start. Small one. And I know we've made great progress in a lot of areas. I sit on a nonprofit board. It used to be all white men. It's now extremely diverse. The conversation, the decision-making is so much better. So I'm keenly aware of where I'm at. So I'm really kind of, it's awkward to talk about it. So I support the aspirational approach, but what I'm trying to understand is, is the Treasurer's Office looking for some hard decisions that are made today? Or are you looking for for this item to come back for further deliberation?
Well, we queued up the discussion, the item for discussion today, and I think it says that as much in the letter and also in the item. I think the idea is to at least look at this idea of establishing 30-30 as the goal. And we go one step further, I would admit, to say that to the extent that companies fall short, that we would take action to vote against all their board members. What I've told Ann is I think that there's probably some room in there to play with how we end up choosing to react. I'm just concerned that without establishing some numerical goals, we're going to continue to sort of luxuriate in this idea that, well, we'll just continue to see if, the ones that some are making progress, and we may use our discretion in that regard, and maybe it's correct discretion, but I'm just saying, without coming back to this board and saying, here's how we're going to determine who's doing well and who's not, who's making progress and who's not, we're not really pushing the goal forward as far as I'm concerned. So so to answer your question directly, it was my hope that we would bring something back that would allow for maybe more concrete action than just waiting another year.
Let me take Dana and then Karen.
So, first of all, Mary, I apologize. I didn't mean any type of disrespect when I said Mary Hartman, I apologize. Good. I was having a Fernwood Tonight flashback. I thought, oh my God, you probably heard that all. Yes, alrighty, I apologize. I think that, I like the aspirational approach also, but I think that we do have to have some hard numbers or some metrics that actually show the growth. And I think we don't have to look any further than how hard it's been for the textbook publishers to comply with the FAIR Act. So I'm glad we're talking about sexual orientation. Jesus, Dana. As Michelle knows, the FAIR Act called for more accurate portrayals of minorities, physically challenged, and GLBT members of our society in our history books. And it's been very difficult for those history book publishers to actually come out and put that into the text of the textbooks. So I think that if we don't have some hard metrics and we don't have some numbers for our corporations that we're engaging with to aspire to, or I don't want to say a hammer, but of a way to call them on the carpet for not meeting that number, I think that just having the aspirational goal doesn't get us where we need to go. So I think that we need to have you all come back with, you have a lot of experience of your engagements and how well we've come up to that. Come back with our aspirational goal and then the metrics that we need to have them meet.
So what we can do, because I want to make sure that you understand, we do take this issue very seriously. Every single, so, you know, sort of, Steve, really kind of, you know, when you say sort of this, you know, you're just going along, we're not. I mean, every single company we meet with who has few or no women on the board, we raise the issue with them. Now, the numbers I gave you, what we need to do is come back and sort of benchmark, okay, those that have 0 or 1, we expect them to get to this amount by this, you know, we'd like to give you this amount of time, because it does not happen overnight. Although we have told companies, you know, most boards, their bylaws provide that they can have between, you know, so many and so many board members, so they can always add somebody, and then when the next person retires, just don't replace them. So that we've gone through chapter and verse with companies as to how they can do this. So I think what the staff, what we can do is come back and sort of benchmark and say, okay, these are the companies this year that we've done. You know, we vote a lot of directors in a lot of different markets. Some markets are not going to be, this issue is not going to be as you know, you look at the Japanese companies, the Germans, you know, because some of the Europeans have the quotas in terms of that, it won't be as much of an issue. And come back either in the Russell, you know, 2 or the Russell 1. It's usually, a lot of times it's the smaller companies and say, okay, this is what we expect of this. The S&P 500, there's no excuse, I think, for some of the larger companies not to, and the Russell 1000, not to have at least 2 women on the board at a certain point. So we could come back and sort of benchmark the various indices in terms of the size and sort of, and then at the end of this proxy season, and say, okay, these companies, we need to send a stronger signal to, and we expect at least this many within this period of time, and hold them to that deadline.
Can I just respond? I don't want to lose sight of the other 30, which is underrepresented ethnic minorities. And I, yeah, as a man of color, I have a special interest in this. And so, you know, because we talk a lot about women on boards, and I fully endorse that. But I think if we're not focusing on the other as well, we're not doing ourselves justice. So I just want to be clear with you. I'm looking for both.
They say an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. So what I'm going to ask is I'll work with the Treasurer's Office and we can work with staff. We will bring the item back with more information and more details. I think it's important for the record to reflect that our conversations are around performance. And the reality is that there's becoming a growing body of research that shows diverse boards with, as we define diversity, gender, ethnicity, background, which I think is often overlooked, background. Those groups generally have richer deliberations, better oversight, better decision-making, less inclined to groupthink, and strategic decision-making. And I think anything that we can do that strengthens our position, backed by the McKinsey report, et cetera, would empower our decision-making and give us greater comfort that our decisions are being driven by the data that shows and proves why we feel so strongly that diversity in all of its forms is in the best interest of shareholders and companies. That over the long haul, those groups will make a better decision. I think if we learned anything in 2007, 2008, there was so much groupthink, and many of the decisions were made by people that looked exactly like me, who believed and thought the same exact way. And, you know, in an age where we're very, very polarized, I think I need to get closer to people who think and see the world very differently than I do, because that's the only way I'm going to grow personally. And I think we will all be better served when we can do that. So Steve, thank the treasurer for bringing this issue forward. It was he who brought the 3D issue to CII over about a decade ago, and it was the staff that put it to work and put it into action. So we will push forward. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Okay. I think we've taken the opportunities to hear from the public before, which we have, so I don't think there's anyone else from the public. Lamont, do you have any information requests on the?
I have one that was from CIO report, which is item number 5, and that was a request for an accounting of portfolio exposure to companies that manufacture and sell bump stocks and similar devices that allow firearms to operate as if they were fully automatic.
Thanks, Lamont. Anyone else who missed anything? Thanks, Lamont. Chris, you want to walk us through the draft agenda?
Yes, sir. Several things to add to this agenda. Obviously, the firearms accounting, as Lamont just mentioned. We need to add the ESG policy back on for another reading as an action item. Brian said that we should put the responsible contractor policy, the language about neutrality clause and contracts. We'll put that on the investment committee. And then the investment policy and management plan, we'll bring that back to add the investment beliefs as a document. And I'll work with Harry to figure out, do we put that at the beginning as a preamble? Where do we put it? But we got to make it so people can, it'll stand out. And then we need to have another, what's missing on this, but we're going to have the staff come back and talk about the next steps in director co-investments or the collaboration model, the CalSTRS way. So this is going to be a very full agenda because it's also your semi-annual performance reports. So I'll try and figure out where we can squeak out some time throughout the policy. One other thing I was going to ask, we can add to this policy or to this agenda contract extensions from Makita and PCA, or if you just want to pass the word to Harry, if Jack has that delegated authority. You don't have to take action on it. I guess you put it on the agenda if you didn't want to extend the contracts, but otherwise everybody's fine. Then we'll just march on as we all. It will be in your September offsite. We probably would talk about the structure because you'll have an RFP in 2019.
Thanks, Chris. Alan, did you? Yeah.
Just, I was wondering, do you really want the RCP coming back to the investment committee since it's not investment contracts? Might it not be better going to the board? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm not sure why you would want it in this committee.
Well, let me talk with Dana separately, not now, and we'll figure out, and we'll check with council and decide where it should be placed. Thanks for bringing that up. Anything else for the good of the order? All right. Seeing nothing else, we're going to go into closed session, and as the public is leaving, we can take maybe, we'll start at 5 after 5, which is about 7 minutes from now. Okay? And we're going to start with the item 22 is which is the item we're going to start with in closed session, item 22.
And Harry, if I could ask, that item is still highly confidential. It contains non-public material information. If we could meet with you back in the caucus room
Oh, great.
That
So
would be even the most
We'll be back
efficient.
there having some soft drinks and trips.
Great.
So meet us back there.
Salsa and chips and invested transaction.